Mark Lackey came in a day early. Normally he's on Tuesdays, but of course we're not going to be here tomorrow. So Mark came in as well, early Executive VP of CHF Capital Markets, and he's talking nickel because the last time we were talking nickel, it was lower than it is currently.
Yeah, you know, Pat, nickel started the year at 6.
Yeah.
We saw it in the 7.5 range. We thought it could get to 850, 875 by the end of the year, and now we're sitting at 850.
Yeah.
And so it's been the top performing commodity. It's had a great year. And when you consider, Pat, when you go back in history, we went from $4 in 2004 to 22 in 2007, and we went back to 4, and we bounced up to 12 in 2011, which probably wasn't a great thing because I think everybody piled into some of the nickel stocks. And then when we sold back down to $6 and stayed there for 3 years, everybody lost interest. And even we only got interested again in nickel about, I'd say a year ago, when we started to see market conditions started to change.
Okay, let's talk about those market conditions because I think the inventories are still running high.
They're still relatively high, Pat, but what you are seeing, given that you have seen a cutback in particularly the nickel pig iron coming out of Indonesia, they announced that they were going to lower those exports back in January. That's at least had some impact on the inventory numbers. And I would suggest that as time goes on, Pat, the other thing that you're seeing is that China and India want to produce higher quality steel. They want better quality nickel, and they're going to demand that. And to get the better quality nickel, well, it's going to mean that you're going to, all things being equal, need a somewhat higher price. So I'm sitting at $10 at the end of next year. There are those people that think we've peaked out, but I don't think so, given the fact that the demand conditions remain strong. And I don't think Indonesia is going to flood the market again. That was really the problem in 2011 when they started flooding the market with this cheap nickel.
Could you actually see supply stay steady or go up or down from here at reasonable levels?
I think, Pat, depending on your price forecast, one of the reasons I don't have the $15 to $20 call that some people have is that certainly would bring the laterites into a much larger degree. As you know, I prefer the sulfides, which you find in the temperate areas of the world, as opposed to laterites that are found in the tropics, which are more capital intensive, more energy intensive, and cost more to produce, and more difficult to produce. So at these prices, I'm not a big fan of laterites, yet there's still some people on the street that think the laterite supply will increase in the near term, but they've got a lower price. Well, that's just not consistent. That's not going to happen. So I think that the reason I'm fairly confident we'll get at least a decent increase is that I don't see laterites coming into any large degree in the near term, especially with prices around between $10 and $12 in the next couple of years.
You know, it's an interesting material too because regulation can come into it to a degree. Indonesia, for instance, talked about more local ownership, and that might slow things down.
Absolutely, Pat, and that's a very good point you make because it's not just nickel, but even other mining operations in Indonesia. They want the new rules are 51% Indonesian ownership. Well, you have to realize Indonesia gets a lot of its capital offshore to really run its mining industry. So I don't think as many mines are going to come out of Indonesia in a number of areas. And as you point out, nickel will be one of them. You won't get as much supply out of Indonesia down the road as people have thought because not everybody's going to put money in when they can't be a majority owner.
Okay, so now let's get to your picks. And I think all three of them we've talked about before, pure nickel.
Right. Well, pure nickel, Pat, you know, this is they've got three actually major projects, and the biggest one, the Man project, is up in Alaska. And now this is low grade, but it's big volume. And they've gone a long way in terms of, getting resource there. They've also got Saltchuk, which they're drilling right now. And their third project is in Manitoba. And I think Manitoba has been, forgotten about by a lot of investors, but there's high quality nickel, sulfide nickel in Manitoba. So this company's got three significant projects. What we've seen, Pat, the big guys have moved, the mid caps have moved, the small caps have not in this nickel market yet. And I think once people are convinced nickel prices, and I get this a lot, once nickel prices, people are convinced they're going to stay up for the next year or so, I think you'll start to see more movement to the small cap arena. In the short run, people have bought big and mid caps, but not the small caps.
But in the pure nickel case, are these prospects or are these actually functioning mines?
Yeah, they are prospects. I mean, but they're further advanced than your average greenfield operation. So they've done a lot of work over the last number of years. And so this is not one where it's kind of just out there and they've drilled a few holes. I would say when you look at, in particular, both Alaska and Manitoba, they have other projects too. But those two in particular are advanced areas because there's been a lot of nickel come out of Manitoba in the past.
What about the management?
You know, again, you've got a very good management team. They've got cash and they don't have an awful lot of shares. So it's another stock, I think, that's been kind of on people's, hasn't been on people's radar screen so much. But now that nickel prices have come back, And I heard a lot of people say to me, once I saw nickel over $8, I'll start looking at these guys again. I think now people are saying, well, I want to make sure nickel prices stay up in the foreseeable future. So I really believe as we go through next year, these juniors are going to get more following.
Okay, Victory Nickel.
Yeah, again, another one we've mentioned before. Now, admittedly, some people will say, well, Victory Nickel, they're the guys shipping frac sand. Yes, they're in the frac sand business because there happens to be frac sand along with their nickel. But people should not forget that they have one of the best nickel deposits in North America, in Manitoba. And as we've said before, Manitoba, cheap power, very good government in terms of pro-mining, strong labor force, good infrastructure. It's one of the top jurisdictions in the world. So people are concentrating on their frac sand, which is fine. That's now being shipped. But I think, don't forget, they have some pretty good nickel potential, particularly in Manitoba. And they also have a play in Quebec that's had some pretty good drilling results in the past.
Okay, good. And North American Nickel.
Yeah, North American is actually the one small cap that's actually shown some movement recently.
Really?
People have caught on to this story, and we've seen the stock move from the mid-40s to about 58 cents. This is a play in Greenland. I'm not going to pronounce the project, but I will say that it's quite extensive. They've actually got more land than Sudbury. Now, I'm not suggesting it's the quality of Sudbury, but the drilling that's been done there has been pretty good. There's also copper and there's also PGMs. The management team's moving this along. I like what they have here because, quite frankly, Pat, when the price went to $6, there's a real dearth of small cap nickel players these days that are sulfide players. And that's what I prefer, and there's very few of them.
Okay, but Greenland, I'm thinking infrastructure, is it there?
Well, interestingly enough, you have had some mining operations in Greenland, and if you're along the coast and where you are, you actually are in pretty good shape. If you had to go further north and inland, I'd be a little more skeptical about what kind of conditions you're going to run into. But, where they are, they actually are in pretty good shape. You're limited in Greenland where you can drill. For a lot of reasons, environmentally and infrastructure. But there are a few areas where you actually can drill. This is one of them.
Okay. Interesting ones. Mark, Thanks so much.
Great to be here, Pat.
Happy Canada Day.
You too, Pat.
All right.